On April 2nd, 2025, students from several schools gathered at David Kuykendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas, for a track and field championship event. It was supposed to be a normal school competition. Instead, it became one of the most talked about criminal cases in the country. Two 17-year-old students who had never met before became involved in an argument. Within minutes, one of them was dead and the other was in police custody. The victim was Austin Metcalf, a student from Memorial High School. The suspect was Karmelo Anthony, a student from Centennial High School. What started as a disagreement under a school tent ended with a fatal stabbing. Eyewitnesses, surveillance footage, police interviews, and a murder investigation. The most important question in the case would become very simple. Was this murder or was it self-defense? To understand how everything happened, we first need to understand who these two teenagers were before they crossed paths that morning. Austin Metcalf was born on July 31st, 2007. He was a junior at Memorial High School in Frisco, Texas. He was well known at school for sports. Austin was the MVP linebacker on the football team and also competed in track and field. Friends and coaches described him as dedicated and competitive. Austin had a twin brother named Hunter Metcalf. The brothers played football together and spent much of their time together. On the day of the incident, Hunter was also at the stadium. Austin arrived at the track meet expecting to compete and spend time with teammates. Nobody knew it would be the last day of his life. Karmelo Sincere Anthony was born on May 10, 2007, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was the oldest of 4 children. His family later moved to Texas. Karmelo attended Centennial High School in Frisco. Like Austin, he was heavily involved in sports. He was captain of both the football and track teams. He also worked 2 part-time jobs and was expected to graduate the following month. At the time of the incident, he had no criminal history. There was no known connection between him and Austin Metcalf. They did not know each other before that day. That fact would become one of the most shocking parts of the case. 2 strangers met for the first time during a weather delay at a school event, and one of them ended up dead. The incident happened at about 10 a.m. Severe thunderstorms and heavy rain forced officials to delay the track meet. Athletes from different schools began searching for shelter while they waited for the weather to improve. Most schools had tents set up near the stadium. Centennial High School did not have a tent. One of Karmelo's teammates later testified that several Centennial students had first taken shelter inside a nearby baseball dugout. According to testimony, a baseball coach eventually told them to leave that area. The students then looked for other places to stay dry. That search eventually brought Karmelo close to the Memorial High School tent. Before the confrontation began, there was no sign that violence was about to happen. According to witness testimony, a Memorial student named Eddie Parra called Karmelo over to the Memorial tent. The 2 teenagers reportedly had a friendly conversation for about 5 minutes. Nothing about the interaction suggested that a serious conflict was developing. After that conversation, Karmelo remained under the Memorial tent. At some point, other Memorial students noticed that a student from another school was staying there. That is when the situation began to change. Hunter Metcalf approached Karmelo and asked him to leave the tent. Austin later joined the conversation. According to witness testimony, the discussion quickly became an argument. Students from different schools were now involved in a disagreement over whether Karmelo should remain under the Memorial tent. Several witnesses later described tension between the teenagers. According to testimony, Karmelo did not leave after being asked. As the argument continued, attention shifted toward Austin and Karmelo. The disagreement was no longer about finding shelter from the rain. It had become a direct confrontation between 2 students. Witness statements and police reports would later become extremely important because they described exactly what happened during the final moments before the stabbing. According to witness accounts, Karmelo reached toward his backpack during the argument. Several witnesses reported hearing him make a statement directed at Austin. According to testimony, Karmelo said, "Touch me and see what happens." The statement immediately changed the situation. Austin reportedly responded, "You don't have anything in that backpack. It's Frisco." The argument continued. Investigators later focused heavily on these statements because they happened just before physical contact occurred. The words spoken during those few seconds became important evidence in understanding what each teenager may have been thinking before the stabbing. Witnesses gave slightly different descriptions of the physical interaction, but several accounts agreed on key details. According to testimony, Austin moved toward Karmelo. One witness reported that Austin grabbed Karmelo in an attempt to move him from the tent area. Another witness quoted in the police arrest report stated that Austin and Karmelo argued back and forth before Austin stood up and pushed him. These details became important because both prosecutors and defense attorneys later focused on the question of who initiated physical contact. What happened next took only seconds. After the physical contact, Karmelo pulled a black knife from his backpack. Witnesses reported that he stabbed Austin once in the chest. There was no prolonged fight. There were no multiple stab wounds. According to witness accounts, a single stab wound was inflicted during the confrontation. Immediately after the stabbing, Karmelo ran from the area. Austin moved away while holding his chest. Students who had been standing nearby suddenly realized that the confrontation had become a medical emergency. The argument that had started under a school tent was now a fatal incident. After being stabbed, Austin moved down the bleachers and asked people to get help. Emergency responders were called. When police arrived, Austin was unconscious and not breathing. Athletic trainers were already performing chest compressions in an effort to save him. Medical personnel continued treatment and transported him to a hospital. Despite those efforts, the injury proved fatal. Austin Metcalf was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. A track meet that had begun as a routine school event had now become a homicide investigation. Here, responding officers began searching for the person responsible for the stabbing. They did not have to search for long. Karmelo Anthony was located near the stadium and detained shortly after the attack. According to the arresting officer, Anthony was ordered to keep his hands in the air. During that interaction, he reportedly made an immediate claim about why he had used the knife. "I was protecting myself." That statement would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case, because it was the first time Anthony claimed he had acted in self-defense. Anthony was then taken into custody. According to the arrest affidavit, he appeared highly emotional during the arrest. Officers described him as crying hysterically while being escorted away from the scene. Even after being detained, Anthony continued speaking to officers. As they walked him toward a patrol vehicle, he reportedly said, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to." Investigators viewed the statement as important because it provided Anthony's explanation for the stabbing only minutes after it happened. It also matched the argument his defense team would later make in court, that physical contact occurred before the knife was used. Then came another statement that immediately caught investigators' attention. At one point, an officer informed others that the alleged suspect had been taken into custody. According to the affidavit, Anthony quickly responded, "I'm not alleged, I did it." Investigators carefully documented the remark. Prosecutors would later point to it as a direct acknowledgement that Anthony had stabbed Austin Metcalf. The defense never disputed that Anthony caused the fatal wound. Instead, the legal fight would focus on whether the stabbing was murder or self-defense. After being placed in the back of a patrol car, Anthony continued asking questions about the situation. According to police records, he asked officers, "Is he going to be okay?" He also reportedly asked whether what he had done could legally be considered self-defense. Body camera footage captured many of these exchanges, giving investigators a record of Anthony's statements only minutes after the incident. By the end of the day, police had gathered witness accounts from students and coaches, surveillance footage from the stadium, body camera recordings, the suspected murder weapon, and several statements made directly by Anthony himself. Those first hours after the arrest would provide some of the most important evidence presented to jurors when the case eventually went to trial. After the investigation began, Anthony was formally charged with murder. Because Texas law treats 17-year-olds as adults in the criminal justice system, he was prosecuted as an adult instead of going through juvenile court. The case quickly attracted attention far beyond Frisco. News outlets across the country covered the story. Videos, witness accounts, and social media posts spread rapidly online. Many people argued about what happened under the tent. Some believed it was clearly murder. Others argued Anthony acted in self-defense. Long before a jury heard the evidence, the case had already become a national topic. Initially, Anthony's bond was set at $1 million. On April 14, 2025, Judge Angela Tucker reduced the bond to $250,000. The judge pointed to several factors, including Anthony's lack of criminal history, his academic record, and his athletic achievements. Anthony was released the same day. The release came with strict conditions. An adult had to supervise him at all times. He had to check in regularly with court officials. He was banned from contacting the Metcalf family. He was also prohibited from using social media. The decision immediately sparked strong reactions. Supporters of Austin's family believed the reduction was unfair. Supporters of Anthony argued that he still deserved the legal presumption of innocence. As public attention grew, both families became targets of harassment. Threats, online attacks, and false information spread across social media. The situation became so serious that authorities launched investigations into several incidents connected to the case. Months later, prosecutors presented evidence to a grand jury. The grand jury reviewed witness testimony, police findings, and other evidence gathered during the investigation. On June 24, 2025, the grand jury formally indicted Anthony for murder. The case would now move toward a full trial. That trial would determine whether the stabbing was murder or lawful self-defense. Jury selection began on June 1, 2026, in Collin County. Nearly 600 potential jurors were considered. Attorneys questioned jurors about their backgrounds, opinions, and ability to remain impartial. The process lasted several days. Eventually, a jury was selected. Opening statements began on June 4th. The prosecution and defense immediately presented very different versions of the same event. Prosecutors described the stabbing as a provoked and unjustified murder. They argued that Anthony encouraged the confrontation and then used a concealed knife during an argument that never justified deadly force. The defense presented a completely different picture. Defense attorneys argued that Anthony was sitting down when the confrontation began. They emphasized that Austin was larger than Anthony and that physical contact occurred before the stabbing. According to the defense, Anthony reacted during a moment of fear and chaos. The entire trial would revolve around those competing arguments. One of the most important pieces of evidence shown to jurors was surveillance footage from the stadium. The video did not contain clear audio, but it captured the movements of the people involved. Jurors watched footage showing activity inside the memorial tent. The prosecution argued the video supported witness testimony describing Anthony as the aggressor. The defense argued the footage showed Anthony being confronted while seated. Jurors watched the recordings multiple times. They carefully examined the moments before the stabbing and the moments immediately afterward. Another portion of the footage showed Anthony leaving the scene after the attack. Although the video could not answer every question, it became one of the most discussed pieces of evidence during the trial. Jurors also listened to emergency calls made after the stabbing. Those recordings brought the chaos of the scene directly into the courtroom. In one call, a caller urgently requested medical help. "I need paramedics at Kuykendall Stadium right away," the caller said. When the dispatcher asked what happened, the answer came immediately. "I have an athlete that was stabbed." Another caller described the severity of Austin's injuries. "My friend's bleeding everywhere." The calls continued as people desperately tried to save him. One caller reported that CPR was being performed. "We're doing compressions and giving him mouth-to-mouth." Another voice could be heard, encouraging Austin to keep fighting. Fight through, Austin. Come on, come on, come on, Austin." The recordings were emotional. They allowed jurors to hear what witnesses experienced in real time rather than hearing about it months later. The prosecution did not rely only on videos and witness testimony. Jurors were also shown physical evidence collected during the investigation. One of the most powerful exhibits was Austin Metcalf's blood-stained jacket. The jacket was introduced to help demonstrate the severity and location of the wound. Its appearance served as a reminder that the case involved a real victim whose life ended within minutes of the confrontation. Jurors examined photographs and evidence connected to the injury. The prosecution argued that the physical evidence matched witness accounts and medical findings. The knife became another major focus of the trial. Witnesses testified that Anthony pulled the knife from his backpack during the confrontation. A police officer later testified that carrying a knife of that size was not illegal under Texas law, even though it violated school policy. The prosecution argued that Anthony's decision to use the knife transformed a brief confrontation into a deadly encounter. The defense argued that possession of the knife itself was not a crime and focused instead on Anthony's claim that he feared for his safety when physical contact occurred. Jurors spent days hearing testimony about those moments. Every witness, photograph, statement, and piece of evidence was examined closely. Several students who were present under the tent testified during the trial. Their testimony became extremely important because they witnessed the confrontation firsthand. One student testified that Anthony was asked to leave multiple times. Witnesses estimated that the requests may have been made as many as 15 times. According to testimony, Anthony responded with statements such as, "Touch me and find out." Several witnesses described Anthony as the aggressor. Others focused on the physical differences between the two teenagers. The defense highlighted that Austin was significantly larger than Anthony. Attorneys repeatedly emphasized that Anthony was seated when much of the confrontation occurred. Cross-examinations focused on differences between witness statements and earlier accounts given to police. The defense attempted to show that memories changed over time. The prosecution argued that the overall story remained consistent. By June 9th, both sides had presented their evidence. Closing arguments gave prosecutors and defense attorneys one final chance to persuade the jury. The prosecution argued that the evidence showed murder. According to prosecutors, nothing justified the use of deadly force. The defense argued that Anthony reacted after being confronted and physically touched. They maintained that he acted out of fear rather than criminal intent. After hearing both sides, jurors left the courtroom to begin deliberations. The future of the case now rested entirely in their hands. The jury deliberated for approximately 3 hours. On June 9th, 2026, jurors returned to the courtroom. Everyone stood as the verdict was read. The jury found Karmelo Anthony guilty of murder. The verdict ended months of legal arguments and public debate about what happened under the memorial tent. The jury rejected the defense position that the killing should be treated differently because of sudden passion. The conviction meant Anthony would now face sentencing. After the guilty verdict, the trial moved into the punishment phase. After completing that process, the jury sentenced Anthony to 35 years in prison. The sentence marked the final decision in one of the most closely watched criminal cases in Texas. A confrontation that lasted only moments had now resulted in decades behind bars. And a case that began with a brief argument under a school tent had changed the lives of two families forever. But one question still divides people to this day. Do you believe the jury reached the right verdict, or do you think this was a case of self-defense? Share your thoughts in the comments below.